All right, guys. So in November, on November 16th and November 20th, the U.S. will face Trinidad and Tobago at home in the opening game on November 16th and away on November 20th in the Nations League. Now, these will serve as well as qualifiers for the Copa America next summer, and there's absolutely no excuse. Really, there shouldn't even be a question about who's going to win these games, right? And not only win, but we should win these games convincingly. Our C team in the Gold Cup beat Trinidad and Tobago. What was it, 6-0, 5-0? Massive score lines. This is our A team. And I want to talk today a little about the USMNT roster that should be called up for those games. Now, we're kind of at a point in the roster build or in where the USMNT roster is at that, 80% of the roster at this point, if guys are healthy, it picks itself, right? Are there some question marks about, backup goalkeepers, maybe a little bit about center backs because there's quite a few candidates, a little bit maybe about wingers, but overall, the roster pretty much picks itself. So I'll quickly run through the roster. I think we should bring. Obviously, Tim Weah's injury changes things. But what I also want to do is I want to talk a little bit about how we should approach these games. And I want to articulate a little bit why I think that. Whoever we put on the field should have no problem handling Trinidad and Tobago. Once you thrash Trinidad and Tobago at home, that game away essentially becomes meaningless because they're not going to beat us 5-0 at home, right? So it's really a time for us to try things, okay? And I'll say what I mean. We have Nations League semifinal and final in March, and then maybe, so that you can't really experiment or try things, okay, at all in March, because that's probably Canada, Mexico, like bigger teams, important games with competition on the line, trophy on the line. Maybe one friendly or two friendlies before Copa America starts in June, probably something in May, okay? But we really have very limited time to experiment and to try things between now and then. So I would use, particularly the game at home against Trinidad and Tobago, to try a few things, particularly with Tim Weah out injured. And I'll talk about that at the end of the stream. But first, let's go quickly through the roster and talk about, who I think we should bring. So for goalkeepers, I would bring Matt Turner, Ethan Horvath, and Gabriel Slonina. Now, obviously, Matt Turner's our number one. Okay, hopefully he doesn't get benched for Forest after that mistake he made last weekend. Ethan Horvath is probably still our number two, and Gabriel Slonina is our number three, in my opinion, okay? Now, there is also supposedly going to be an Olympic camp in November, so Slonina may go to that. But, UPenn might say, oh, we don't have to release him for Olympic camp. So if they don't want to release him for that, fine. Bring him as the third goalkeeper for the senior team. Now, some people could say, oh, you could bring Drake Callender, you could bring Roman Celentano. Those are probably two guys that are there or thereabouts in the mix. And some people would say, don't bring Ethan Horvath at all because he's not playing in the Premier League. My argument is Slonina would not be in the Premier League. So we would not start in the Premier League. Drake Callender would not start in the Premier League. And Roman Celentano would not start in the Premier League. Does that mean that because Ethan Horvath can't start in the Premier League, he should no longer be our number two? In my opinion, no. He has shown, despite, honestly, over the course of his career, not getting enough playing time, that he's quite reliable as a number two when he has to step up and do well. And yeah, I think he should move for sure. I think he should probably come to MLS in January, maybe go to Atlanta, who could use an actual professional keeper. But for now, I still think he's our number two. And then look, if you want to say Callender or Roman Celentano should be the number three, fine. Like, I don't have major arguments about that, especially if UPenn releases Gabriel Slonina for the Olympic camp, okay? But there's a good chance they won't. Okay, come be with our senior team, all right? So that's the three goalkeepers that I would bring based on if they don't release Slonina for the Olympics. If they don't release Slonina for the Olympics, fine, bring Celentano or Callender. I think we're talking relatively similar levels right now. Let's go to fullbacks, and fullbacks again picks themselves. So long as all four are healthy, it's Serginho Dest, Joe Scally, Anthony Robinson, and Christopher Lund. And there's not really anybody challenging strongly for any of those positions. I got an argument with somebody on Twitter about, John Tolkien should be there as, the backup left back. Personally, I think Lund is a better player right now. I think Tolkien is very limited technically. But a lot of people disagree with me on that. Is it a hill I'm going to die on about who should be Anthony Robinson's backup? Probably not. Probably not. I think Lund is fair. I think some people could make a case for Tolkien or, even a Wiley or even Jonathan Gomez, who's really starting to show some good things in, La Liga 2, which is essentially the same level as Serie B, which is where Lund is playing. So I could hear arguments for that. You could make an argument for Dewan Jones. I would go Lund and Anthony Robinson right now. But if somebody else thinks, we should have a different backup left back, I'll disagree. But I think you probably have some arguments because I don't think the gap is huge right now. But these are the four that I would bring as fullbacks. And, I'll talk about this at the end here, but I'd like to use some of these players in a slightly different position. Center backs. And for me, these are the four center backs who should be there in November. Cameron Carter-Vickers, Tim Ream, Chris Richards, and Austin Trusty. Okay, so 3 Premier League center backs and 1 center back for the best team in Scotland. Who are the other? The reason I have Trusty is because he's left-footed. He is starting now for Sheffield United and showing well enough. Did he get cooked by Nketiah last week? Yes, but considering he's looking mostly competent, and by the way, in that game, he did a lot of good defensive work as well. I think he's looking competent enough in the Premier League, and at the age of 25, he's still not quite in his prime yet, just turned 25. And he's left-footed. I think it's time for him to come in and be Tim Ream's backup and potentially push Tim Ream as we go towards, Copa America or, World Cup. Maybe not Copa America, but certainly bring him in now and get him integrated and get him ready to potentially take a starting role in the future. Chris Richards is still my starting center back pair with Tim Ream. Although maybe I'd give Trusty half against, Trinidad and Tobago with Chris Richards. You could also hear arguments for Cameron Carter-Vickers. The problem with Carter-Vickers is we don't see enough of him at a high level, right? We see him in Scotland. Let's face it, it's a very, very poor level of play, okay? But Cameron Carter-Vickers, to be fair, he didn't look terrible against Atletico Madrid. He did get a yellow card. And he did have a few shaky moments. That's Atletico Madrid. I think Cameron Carter-Vickers, and I've said this many times, needs to start pushing himself. Hopefully, come the summer, he gets a move out of Celtic because I think he's, playing above that level right now. But these are the 4 I would bring. No Miles Robinson, no Mark McKenzie. I guess those are the 2 big challengers for a spot in this roster, and certainly no Walker Zimmerman. Let's move on to midfielders now. And honestly, this midfield group, since, Tyler Adams is out, they kind of picked themselves. And it's Johnny Cardoso, Weston McKennie, Yunus Musa, Luca de la Torre, Malik Tillman, and Giovanni Reyna. So the way I have this divided up is you have the 10s, okay, Malik Tillman and Gio Reyna. You have the 6s, which in this case is Johnny Cardoso and Yunus Musa. And then you have the 8s, which is Weston McKennie and Luca de la Torre. Now, could you bring Leonard Maloney as well in this group? Sure. I mean, I suppose I wouldn't really be mad if he got called up as well. It's just that against Trinidad and Tobago, where we're going to be having most of the ball and doing minimum defending, his skill set as a sort of combative defensive midfielder isn't going to be as needed, in my opinion, as guys who are a bit better on the ball than him, whether that's Johnny Cardoso or Yunus Musa, Luca de la Torre. I still think this is a balanced enough midfield group that we've got the defensive side of the game. We got the 8s who can go box to box. And then obviously we have the creative 10s, the Malik Tillmans and the Gio Reynas there. So you could convince me to add Leonard Maloney to this group. But I think this is the 6 I would probably bring just because we don't really need Leonard Maloney in this camp. Wide forwards now. So with Tim Weah out injured, these are the 4 wingers I would bring. Christian Pulisic, Alejandro Zendejas, Brendan Aronson, and Kevin Paredes. Now, Luka Koleosho is a guy who is reportedly in talks with Gregg to try and do something. Now, from what I've heard, I don't know how reliable this is, he might not be ready to commit just yet, but there's definitely interest. With Weah out, and Pulisic, by the way, is injured for Milan. We'll see if he starts this weekend. If he doesn't start this weekend, it'll be like, how fit will he be? To me, if Weah and Pulisic are out, that is the time to say, hey, Koleosho, come in, come get a start, for the U.S. Obviously, he'd have to file that one-time switch, so he'd have to be ready to make that switch. And if he's not, that's okay. These are the 4 I would bring. Pulisic, no, that's the obvious one. Brendan Aronson, we all know how he's been for Union Berlin this season and quite frankly for Leeds last season as well. But due to the injuries and the lack of serious depth, and particularly with the Olympics coming up, fine. Brendan Aronson's still there in the group. Zendejas had a terrible, terrible, terrible Gold Cup. But since the Clausura started, he's got 4 goals and 3 assists in just over 600 minutes. And I don't think that's necessarily going to translate to the international level. But as a depth piece for this camp with injuries, I'd be fine with giving, Zendejas another camp, another look, see how he does. Kevin Paredes has finally got his start for Wolfsburg, and that's, exciting to see. He's been getting better, more consistent, getting hopefully stronger. Probably should be with the Olympic group come the Olympics if, Koleosho commits and obviously Tim Weah is healthy. But for this camp, probably bring him into this group and let Taylor Booth go to the Olympic group. That would be what I would do. But again, I mean, some people might make arguments for Taylor Booth over Zendejas or even over Paredes. And to them, I say, yeah, like, sure, he's kind of in that group with Paredes right now, and maybe, probably better than Zendejas, but there or thereabouts where you're like, they're a similar, nobody of those two, particularly with Paredes and Booth, is making a strong case. To be fair, Aronson isn't making a strong case either. So I could hear arguments to bring Booth in. I'd probably go with these 4, and Paredes is only here because of the injuries. Send both of them, Paredes and Booth to the Olympics, because we are going to need quality wide players in those Olympics. So that's probably what I would do come next summer. But for now, I'd have Paredes in this group. And then the forwards, again, pick themselves. It's Balogun, Pepe. There isn't really much competition so long as Sargent is injured, right? So it's really just these 2. Sargent's the number 3, but he's got to get healthy, got to get scoring again. Haji Wright's been disappointing for Coventry. P. Fox heading in some nice set pieces. And so if you argue, we could bring him in, I mean, sure. For me, he's probably at best 4th on this depth chart. And no, we don't want to bring in El Pirata de la Caribbean, Jesus Ferreira, who once again is ghosting in the MLS playoffs, to no one's surprise, after ghosting last year in the MLS. But he missed 2 good chances against Seattle, 1v1 with the keeper. One he shot straight at the keeper, and one he shanked like it was a field goal in the NFL. So no, and no. No Ferreira. These are the 2 strikers I would bring. That's 23 players. Like I said, I could hear arguments for other left backs or other third keepers, or maybe an additional midfielder like Maloney. But to me, this is a pretty strong and solid roster. Now, let's talk about some things that I would do. The first thing I would like to try with this group, and we haven't really tried it before, is instead of just putting Brendan Aronson at the right wing to replace Weah, which, to be honest, it's Trinidad and Tobago. He should be able to handle that role with 0 problems at all. But I think it would be more compelling to actually bring some real attack to that right wing. And I'd push Serginho Dest up to play on the right wing and just have Scally start at right back. I think that Dest's technique, ability on the ball, vision, flair, 1v1 ability, goal-scoring prowess is a stretch, Pete. But he can hit a goal. We've seen him do it before. Really, I'd just like to see Dest combining with other technical players like Reyna and Balogun without the defensive responsibilities that he often has as a right back. And let's be honest, it's Trinidad and Tobago. At home especially, we should be all over them. And I think actually Dest would provide more in the attack than Brendan Aronson ever could. And again, it's just experimenting with that as a possibility if we ever need, we're down a goal and we don't really have a strong winger off the bench in a Copa America. So now you bring on Joe Scally and you push Dest up and have him be more part of the attack. Is it going to work? I don't know, but here's the time to try it, right? Here's the time to try it, to give him some reps there. So I'd love to see that tried. And then the other one I want to try, and this is something even Gregg has talked about, is playing with a back 3. And it's not that we need a back 3 against, Trinidad and Tobago, because, it's Trinidad and Tobago. But again, it's not about Trinidad and Tobago. It's about playing in that system and getting them familiar with that system and then going from there. So I'd probably do something like Richards, or Richards at right center back, maybe Trusty or Ream at center back, and then, either Trusty or Ream at left center back. Musa, McKennie, and Reyna make up that midfield. Dest and Robinson as wing backs, and then Pulisic playing as a withdrawn second forward behind Balogun. Or you could invert that and have Gio play as a second forward behind Balogun and Pulisic playing as the 10 attacking midfielder. Either one of those would be fine, but it creates this beautiful little triangle for Pulisic, Balogun, and Gio to cook. And I think that would be super fun to watch. And potentially, again, Gregg has talked about using a back three and experimenting. And by the time we get to Copa America, having that back three, we've never tried it. We've never tried it. So we could talk about it, but we need alternative options going into Copa. And now is the time to at least try it. And then you can hone it again against better opponents, maybe in a friendly before Copa America, because I don't know how much experimentation you can do in March with the Nations League on the line. All right, guys, that's it. Those are my thoughts on the roster for November. Tell me yours in the comments below. Don't forget to smash that like button before you leave. Have a great one, and I'll see you on the weekend.